He was still working, bent over boxes and time-worn steps, while the world around him seemed to have moved on. A gray-hailed delivery driver, long past retirement age, quietly loaded up another order. In the corner, a young manager scoffed with a sneer barely masked by sarcasm. "He's still doing this?" he muttered, loud enough for others to hear but not bold enough to own the judgment on his face. No one laughed. No one corrected him either. But that night, something rare and powerful was about to unfold, sparked by a single delivery. This wasn't just another night. It was the beginning of a transformation. One undercover boss, one overlooked man, and one seemingly ordinary order that would unravel a deeper truth and spark a chain reaction no one saw coming. And when the truth finally surfaced, there were no tears of regret, only gratitude, because sometimes the quietest souls carry the loudest lessons. So, if you were the boss, what would you do after discovering that the kindest soul in the building was the one most ignored? Would you 1. Fire the disrespectful manager? To reward the elderly driver with more than just words? 3. Share his story company-wide to inspire others? 4. Or maybe all of the above? This isn't just a story of pizza. It's a story of heart. Because when you look beyond the surface, the ones we often overlook can turn out to be the very foundation holding everything up. Don't miss the full story. Let's rewind to how it all began. It was a biting Tuesday afternoon when Jackson, the founder and CEO of one of America's fastest-growing pizza chains, zipped up a faded windbreaker, one he hadn't worn since the company's earliest days. In the mirror, he barely recognized himself. The usual sharp business suit was replaced by worn sneakers and a baseball cap that had seen better days. He wasn't preparing for a board meeting. He was preparing to disappear into the very world he had built from the ground up. That morning, Jackson wasn't walking into the corner office. He was stepping back in time into the front lines of his empire. Incognito. No titles, no recognition. Just a customer named Rick, living in a modest neighborhood on the edge of town, placing a Friday night order like any other. The reason? Things didn't feel right. For months, Jackson had quietly received reports, delivery delays, lukewarm customer feedback, complaints about staff attitude, especially from the delivery crew. On paper, everything looked great. Sales were climbing, the brand's jingles echoed across airwaves, but Jackson trusted his instincts more than he trusted spreadsheets. He didn't just want numbers, he wanted the truth. So he did what few leaders have the courage to do. He shaved off his well-groomed beard, dyed his hair darker, and transformed into just another name in the queue. A hidden camera crew, posing as documentarians profiling small businesses, followed him from a distance. The stage was set, but no one, not even Jackson, knew how emotional the night would become. He placed an order through the app, a pizza with tricky customizations, extra cheese, light sauce, gluten-free crust. He added wings, a soda, and left a modest tip. Not too generous, not too stingy, just enough to keep it real. Then he sat back in a recliner inside a small rental house he had borrowed for the weekend and waited. What Jackson didn't know was that the store he had chosen had developed a local reputation, not for poor food or long waits, but for something colder. Efficient, yes. Warm, not so much. One review read, "Food's fine, people are ice cubes." Another one, "Driver tossed the box at my porch like a newspaper, never again." And as Jackson waited, something stirred in him. He felt uneasy, not as a CEO, but as a man. It had been years since he waited for a delivery with no strings attached. No VIP treatment, no name drop, just another guy hoping his dinner would arrive intact. Meanwhile, back at the store, the atmosphere was different. The back room buzzed, not with enthusiasm, but with obligation. It was peak hour, but no one moved like it mattered. Apathy hung thick in the air. Pizza boxes flew down the assembly line with more speed than care. Cheese was scattered, not placed, sauce slathered with a sigh. For some of the crew, it wasn't about feeding families anymore. It was about finishing shifts. The manager on duty, Todd, barely in his 30s, was loud, fast-talking, and had climbed ranks quickly thanks to slashing delivery times. But leadership? That was another story. When Jackson's order came through, Todd scoffed. Order 127. Rick B. Gluten-free, of course. Probably another one of those complainers, he chuckled, mostly to himself. No one laughed. Most had heard this kind of talk before. His sarcasm, the shortcuts, the not-so-subtle digs at customers who dared to be particular. "Where's Gary?" he barked, scanning the room. One of the employees shrugged. "Out back. Again." A murmur. A roll of the eyes. "Still here, working like that?" And with that throwaway line, something shifted. What started as an ordinary shift was about to turn into something unforgettable, not just for Jackson, but for everyone watching. Because what they didn't know was that Gary was about to become the heart of a story that would redefine the company from the inside out. The hum of the kitchen continued as if on autopilot, with workers moving through motions more than meaning. In a back corner, a teenage employee fumbled with a handful of toppings, his hands uncertain, movements clumsy, clearly still new to the job. Todd, the manager, passed by, leaned in with a nudge of his elbow, and muttered with casual cruelty, "Don't worry, it's just for some cranky old guy. He won't even taste the difference." The teen hesitated, his confidence shaken. He looked at the half-made pizza, then back at Todd, unsure, but eventually he returned to his task, more robotic now, less careful. Without even realizing it, the very order that Jackson had placed me to be a test of quality and character was already being compromised. The wings were tossed into their container like an afterthought, the soda left on the prep table, only to be knocked over moments later and lazily cleaned up before being replaced. Every part of this order became a reflection of the deeper problem Jackson had feared. Not poor performance, but a lack of pride, a disconnection from purpose. Out back, under the dimming glow of dusk, Gary leaned against the cold brick wall, adjusting his thin, worn jacket as the temperature began to drop. He had just returned from a long delivery out in the hills, his knees aching, as they always did when the rain loomed. At 69, he was the oldest delivery driver on staff by a wide margin. Some of the younger crew joked that he came with the building, like a fixture too stubborn to fade, but Gary never let it bother him. In truth, he liked the job. It gave him a reason to keep moving, and more importantly, it helped support his granddaughter, who had come to live with him after losing her parents. She was everything to him now, his reason, his rhythm. As he stepped back inside, Todd's voice rang through the noise, sharp and indifferent. "Gary, you got one. Far zone, weird crust. Might be a picky one. You good?" Gary nodded, calm and steady. "Sure, give me a sec to grab my stuff." His voice, as always, was even, never in a rush, never bitter. As he turned, someone in the kitchen muttered, just loud enough to be heard, "Can't believe he's still here, working like that." Todd smirked. No correction, no reprimand, just a smirk. Whether Gary heard it and chose to ignore it or simply didn't hear at all, no one knew. But his focus remained fixed. He carefully packed the pizza and wings into the thermal bag, checked the address twice, and did something none of the others even noticed. He pulled out a napkin, scribbled a short message. "Thank you for your order. Hope your evening is warm and full of good things," and tucked it beside the box. Sometimes he included a treat from home, a wrapped cookie or a small piece of candy. Tonight it was a soft, homemade peanut butter cookie, slightly lopsided, wrapped in cling film and tied with a string. Not because he had to. Not because it was protocol. But because that's who Gary was. Quiet kindness. No spotlight. Out front, Todd had already returned to his phone, thumbing through messages between orders. He didn't check Gary's ETA, didn't give the delivery another thought. To him, it was just another ticket off the board. Forgettable. But what Todd didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the man waiting for that delivery wasn't some picky customer. He was the very founder of their company, and tonight the smallest act of kindness was about to leave the deepest impression. 29 minutes after Jackson clicked place order, the porch light of his modest rental flickered on as a car pulled up slowly to the curb. It wasn't a company vehicle, just a beat-up beige sedan, its bumper dented, one headlight flickering like an old film reel. A car that had lived a full life and wasn't ready to give up. Jackson stood by the window, peeking through the blinds. What he saw made him still. The man emerging from the car didn't rush. He didn't fumble or hurry. He moved with intention, not the frantic speed of a man racing a clock, but the graceful steadiness of someone who understood that some things deserved time. Gary opened the back door, removed the thermal bag with the care of a craftsman, adjusted his cap and walked up the short path. No earbuds, no call on speaker. Just the quiet presence of a man who treated each delivery like a personal favor, not a task. Jackson opened the door just before Gary knocked. And there he was. Gary, tall, a little hunched, streaks of silver in his hair, smile lines so deep they seemed to carry stories of decades. His uniform was clean, though faded, his shirt tucked under a light jacket. He looked tired, but his eyes were warm. "Good evening, sir," he said gently, his voice like a soft cello. "One gluten-free pizza, extra cheese, light sauce, wings, and a soda. Hope I got that right." Jackson nodded, caught off guard by how sincere the man sounded. "Yes, perfect," he replied, almost whispering. Gary handed over each item with deliberate care. Then, as if remembering something extra, he reached into the bag one more time. "Just a little something I like to include for new customers," he said, extending a folded napkin. Inside was the cookie, slightly crooked, lovingly wrapped. "It's my granddaughter's recipe," Gary added. "Peanut butter, only if you're not allergic, of course." Jackson stared at the gift. He hadn't felt that kind of unexpected tenderness from a stranger in years, maybe never. The silence between them felt full, too full to break. "You been doing this long?" Jackson asked, still in character. Gary chuckled, a soft puff of humility. "Longer than I planned, I guess. Started after I retired early from the post office. Then, well, life changed. My daughter passed. Left behind my granddaughter. She's my world now. So here I am, doing what I can, trying to stay useful." He said it not for sympathy, not to impress, just a quiet offering of truth. Jackson didn't respond right away. His mind wasn't in CO mode. It was somewhere more human, more raw. He was thinking like a father, a grandfather, a man who had built walls of success, but had forgotten what lived outside them. Gary went on softly, "Most people are kind. Some don't say much, but I figure, even if it's just pizza, it's still a chance to show someone a little kindness." With that, he tipped his cap and turned to go. Jackson stood there, holding the box, the napkin, the cookie, and something else he hadn't expected. A lump in his throat. The food sat on the coffee table untouched. Steam curled gently. The soda left a ring of condensation, but Jackson didn't sit. He just stared at the handwritten note, reading it again and again. "Hope your evening is warm and full of good things." It wasn't just a gesture, it was a memory in the making. He couldn't let it end there. Grabbing his coat, Jackson rushed outside, spotted the beige sedan turning into a gas station nearby, He called the documentary crew. Keep filming from a distance. Minutes later, he approached Gary at the pump. Did you forget something? Gary asked with a chuckle, still friendly. No, Jackson said, his voice softer now. I just wanted to thank you. For the cookie, the note, and for how you treated me. Gary offered a modest shrug, his smile humble and effortless. It's nothing, really. Just trying to make people's day a little easier, that's all. Jackson nodded, a softness settling over his features. Then, with quiet curiosity, he asked, Can I ask something? Why are you still doing this? At your age? Most folks would have hung up their keys long ago. Gary leaned gently against the side of his old sedan, the gas pump clicking softly in the background. His eyes drifted toward the dim sky, and something behind them softened, not in sadness, but in reflection. Yeah, he said with a slow exhale. I suppose most people would have. But life doesn't always ask you what you want to do. Sometimes it tells you what you have to do. He paused, choosing his words with care. My wife passed away 10 years ago. We were together 40 years. High school sweethearts. She used to joke that I could deliver anything, even her patience, he said, a nostalgic grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. After she was gone, I didn't know what to do with myself. 30 years at the post office and suddenly, nothing to wake up for. His voice drifted, gaze lost for a moment in the glow of the station lights. Then my daughter got sick. Cancer. It came fast and cruel. Took her before we had time to understand what was happening. Left behind my granddaughter, Ellie. She was 8 then. Lost both her parents in under a year. I didn't even think twice. I stepped in. A breath. He's 16 now, bright as daylight, wants to be a teacher. Says she wants to help kids feel safe. I'm just trying to make sure she gets that shot, that she doesn't have to carry the weight I do. Jackson stood in silence, hands deep in his coat pockets, heart heavy with every word that hung between them. Gary continued, his voice steady but heartfelt. This job, it's not glamorous, it's not easy, but it keeps the lights on, keeps me moving, and maybe more important, it gives me a chance to be kind. That still matters, you know, especially now. You never know what kind of day someone's had. Sometimes a warm pizza and a kind word, it's not just dinner. It's comfort, it's reminder that someone still cares. There was no trace of complaint in his voice, no bitterness, only quiet resilience, the kind that doesn't shout but endures, the kind of strength that doesn't seek applause. And in that moment, Jackson saw it clearly. Gary wasn't just delivering pizza, he was delivering dignity, compassion, humanity. Night after night, he was quietly doing the work of healing in a world that often forgets to notice. They stood side by side, 2 men from opposite ends of life's path, one wrapped in the armor of a corporate identity, the other wrapped in lived experience and invisible scars. Yet here, in the flicker of gas station lights, they were equals. Then Gary chuckled lightly, easing the emotional weight. Now, don't go telling the other drivers I give out cookies, he said, eyes twinkling. I've got a reputation to protect. Jackson laughed, a real laugh this time, unguarded and grateful. Your secret's safe with me, he replied, knowing it wouldn't be for long. The original plan had been simple. Observe from the shadows, gather data, let the hidden cameras do the talking, reveal nothing until the footage had been analyzed. But that plan had dissolved the moment Gary spoke about his granddaughter. This wasn't about business anymore. This was about truth. Jackson took a deep breath and met Gary's gaze. There's something I need to tell you, he said quietly. Gary tilted his head, curious but calm. I'm not just a customer, Jackson continued, his fingers nervously fidgeting with the zipper of his coat. My name's not Rick B. That was a cover. My real name is Jackson Blake. I'm the founder and CEO of the company you work for." The words hung in the air like thunder. Gary blinked. His smile dropped into stillness, not in fear, just disbelief. His eyes scanned Jackson's face, from the weathered windbreaker to the old sneakers. "You're the Jackson Blake? The guy from the commercials?" Jackson nodded. "Yeah, that's me." Gary stepped back, breath escaping like a low whistle. "Well, I'll be a—" His eyes flickered with something layered. Awe, concern, wonder. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked genuinely. "I mean, I hope I didn't mess up the order or say something I shouldn't have." That was the moment that broke Jackson. Even after all the generosity, the handmade cookie, the heart-spoken story, this man's only concern was whether he'd gotten the delivery right. Jackson stepped forward quickly. "No, Gary, you didn't do anything wrong. In fact, you did everything right. More than right. You reminded me why I built this company. You reminded me what matters." Gary looked down, humbled, a soft smile returning. "Well," he said with a chuckle, "then I guess this is where I say thank you for the job." Jackson laughed, brushing a hand through his hair. "And this is where I say thank you for showing me what the job actually means." The crew, who had been respectfully filming from afar, slowly moved closer, capturing a quiet moment as the two men stood side by side. "So all this was a test?" Gary asked gently. Jackson nodded. "Yeah, a way to see what's really happening out there. I wasn't expecting to meet someone like you, but I'm so glad I did." Gary extended his hand. "Kindness. It has a way of finding its way back. Sometimes not right away, but it always does." Jackson took his hand and before he knew it, pulled him into a brief hug. Not for the cameras, not for the story, just a simple gesture of gratitude. Two men bound now by something beyond roles or titles. As they stepped apart, Jackson's voice wavered. "Gary, I won't forget this night. Or you. And I don't want this to be the end of the conversation. Would you be willing to meet my team? Share your story? Maybe help us build something better?" Gary blinked, surprised, then smiled, slow and wide. "If you think I've got something worth sharing, I'd be honored." Neither of them could have known what would come next, but Jackson's mind was already racing. 2 weeks later, the footage was reviewed. The cookie, the note, the story about Ellie, the moments of silent kindness. More than one crew member had cried while editing. Jackson called his executive team, not for a Zoom call, not a memo, but a real meeting, face to face. And there, in a sleek conference room usually filled with charts and forecasts, he played the uncut footage. No edits, no branding, just the truth. When the lights came back on, the room was still. Then Jackson stood. "We've built a successful company, but success means nothing if we forget the people who carry us. Gary reminds us of who we are at our best, and now it's our turn to show him and everyone else what that really means." 1 week later, Gary found himself standing in front of a building he had never stepped into. Corporate headquarters. It looked nothing like the places he was used to. Glass panels shimmered in the sunlight, and sleek company cars lined the lot. He parked his aging sedan between two spotless SUVs and glanced toward his granddaughter Ellie, who had insisted on riding along. Her eyes sparkled, taking it all in. "You nervous, Grandpa?" she asked, sensing the tightness in his breath. Barry chuckled softly, smoothing the collar on his Sunday best shirt, the one he wore to church when he felt like honoring something sacred. "Do I look too plain?" he asked. "You look perfect," Ellie replied, her voice firm and proud. When they stepped through the front doors, Gary was taken aback, not by cameras or reporters, but by people. A small crowd had gathered, employees from across departments, Receptionists, warehouse workers, marketing associates, people who had watched the footage and felt something awaken. They weren't there to pose. They were there to shake his hand. At the front of the room stood Jackson, no longer undercover, no longer in disguise, just a man holding back visible emotion as he welcomed someone who had changed him. He stepped forward, his voice thick with gratitude. "Gary," Jackson began, "I came into your life pretending to be someone else. But in return, you reminded me of the person I had forgotten how to be." He turned, gesturing to a covered object behind him. "This isn't just a thank you. It's a way of giving something back to someone who has spent years quietly giving to others." He pulled the cover down with a swift motion. Beneath it sat a brand new, fuel-efficient vehicle, customized for delivery, low maintenance, long-lasting one. On the rear license plate, printed discreetly in small silver lettering, "Thank you, Gary." Gary's breath caught. Before he could speak, Jackson stepped forward again. "This car is yours, paid for, insured, and maintained for life, so you can keep doing what you love without worry." Gary opened his mouth, but no words came. His hands trembled, not from age, but from the emotional weight of it all. Jackson gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "And there's more." He turned to Ellie. "We've also set up a college scholarship in your name, full tuition, anywhere you want to go, because no man who gives this much to his family should ever wonder if their child can dream big." Ellie gasped, tears spilling before she could blink. Gary turned to her, then back to Jackson, his throat tight. "I don't know what to say," he finally managed, voice cracking with humility. "I've always believed in doing the right thing, even when no one's watching. I never expected this. Thank you. Not just for the gifts, but for seeing me. That's the real reward." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, it was heartfelt. People clapped not because they were told to, but because something inside them had been touched, because they saw themselves, or who they wanted to be, in Gary. In the middle of the room stood a man who had never asked for attention, but who deserved it more than most. 3 months had passed since that rainy evening changed the course of an entire company. Since a tired man with kind eyes and a homemade cookie reminded a CEO that humanity wasn't just a value, it was a practice. Jackson now sat alone at his desk, not hiding, not in costume, just himself. The same desk where marketing strategies were born, where stock projections were reviewed. But today wasn't about projections. It was about reflection. He watched through his office window as a group of new hires filed in for orientation. Somewhere in that group, he knew, was the next Gary. Someone overlooked. Someone carrying the weight of quiet battles no one could see. And he hoped they'd be noticed. Because that was the part no graph or metric could capture. The soul behind the uniform, the history behind the hustle, the heart behind the hands. The ripple from Gary's story kept growing. Customers wrote letters, not about delivery times or coupon codes, but about people. One woman shared how her delivery driver had noticed her struggling with groceries and stepped in without hesitation. Another talked about her teenage son, inspired by Gary's story, coming home from his first shift determined to become someone his coworkers could count on. These weren't reviews, they were revelations, proof that kindness wasn't just alive, it was contagious. For years, Jackson had built a company obsessed with efficiency, growth, and branding. But the moment Gary handed him a cookie, something broke open in him, a silence he hadn't realized had formed. He thought about his father, an honest machinist who never finished high school but never missed a day of work. Jackson could still see him tying his boots at dawn. "A man's worth," his father used to say, "ain't in what he owns, It's in how he shows up. Somewhere along the way, Jackson had stopped showing up for his people. Not maliciously, just slowly, quietly. But Gary had reminded him of the truth. So Jackson created a new program. Quiet. No press release, no viral campaign, just purpose. He called it the names we don't forget. Each month, employees across the country could nominate a colleague. Not for sales numbers, but for extraordinary kindness in everyday moments. Winners didn't receive a big check or a trophy, just a handwritten letter from Jackson and their photo placed on a wall in every store. A quiet nod that being good still matters. As for Gary, he eventually hung up his delivery bag. But he didn't retire from the mission. Jackson offered him a new role. Ambassador of culture. Not just a face, a presence, a voice. Gary now traveled to stores, shared stories, shook hands, listened to people. He didn't preach, he reminded that dignity doesn't come from titles. It comes from how you treat the person right in front of you. And perhaps the most beautiful note of all, Ellie began her college journey that fall. On her first day, she called Gary. "Grandpa," she said, "I'm going to study education because people like you taught me that small things change the world." Jackson smiled when he heard about the call. He leaned back in his chair, eyes tracing the skyline, and thought of that first knock on the door. How ordinary it had seemed. How sacred it had become. Not every delivery comes with a lesson. Not every worker has a dramatic story. But every person carries something. A past, a dream, a heart. And all of it deserves to be met with kindness. So the legacy lived on, not in press clippings or headlines, but in quiet, unseen moments. A thank you with meaning, a pizza delivered with care. A company rediscovering its soul, one small act at a time. Because in the end, it wasn't about a boss going undercover. It was about a man learning to see again and choosing, finally, to listen.